I'm so pleased to share this presentation entitled Best Practices for Step-Parents with Adolescent Stepchildren. Before I jump in, just a quick note about me. So I'm an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm also a faculty fellow at the Carolina Population Center. I'm affiliated with the National Council on Family Relations, and I co-chair the focus group on diverse family structures, which is really a convening of researchers, educators, practitioners who are interested in supporting and understanding the experiences of a diverse set of family structures. And taken together, I have a bit over 12 years of experience conducting research on step families. And on a personal note, I spent essentially all of my adolescent years living in a step family. I lived with my father and stepmother and had a younger stepbrother. And perhaps above all, at least I aspire to be your friendly neighborhood stepfamily scientist. It's really a priority point for me to take findings from my own research, findings from the research being done by others in my field, and to move that knowledge out into the world where it might be most useful, whether that's for stepfamily members directly or for the practitioners, coaches, other helping professionals who are well positioned to support stepfamilies of various kinds. So here's what I hope to cover in the presentation. So first, I just want to briefly make the case that focusing on stepfamilies with adolescent children is warranted and is important. So I'll try to make that case. Then I'm going to move into a conversation about what some evidence-based best practices are for step parents who will be acquiring or who have already acquired adolescent stepchildren. And then towards the end of the presentation, I'm going to briefly highlight some free resources. I'll have some QR codes that will link you directly to some of those resources. And then a note about how you all might think about joining the conversation. I'll highlight some of the platforms I'm very active on, and I'll briefly highlight the website for my research lab. So first, why should we care about step families that have adolescent stepchildren? Why might this experience be unique? I think for lots of reasons, but I really want to highlight at least two. So first, when stepfamilies form in the presence of adolescent children, adolescents have already lived numerous years. They have a fairly vivid sense of what life was like before the stepfamily formed. And that serves as a very powerful contrast point for them once a stepfamily does form. So contrast that with stepfamilies that form in the presence of very young children. Sometimes the children are so young they don't even remember the transition happening, and the caregivers who encircle them in that stepfamily simply become the only caregivers that young child has ever known. So there's this really stark pre and post stepfamily transition contrast for adolescents that can introduce some nuances and some potential challenges. And then second, adolescence is so developmentally rich. There's so many changes happening during the adolescent period that really makes families of any kind need to adjust and adapt. So I'm going to highlight some of those in more detail here. So if we look at the adolescent period as a stage of development, many things are happening. On the physical front, puberty, so significant changes to their physical bodies and brains. Uh, Indeed, in particular with the brain, accelerated growth of the amygdala. This is the emotion processing region of the brain and can lead to sensation seeking, boredom avoidance, impulse control challenges. With changes to the brain come notable gains in cognitive abilities. So adolescents are able to begin thinking more abstractly, and they can start to be more skillfully critical and even idealistic. And sometimes that criticism and idealism gets targeted toward their caregivers. At this stage, from a social perspective, emotional perspective, adolescents are also generally seeking autonomy and independence. They're kind of moving toward adulthood and they're striving to take on new responsibilities and striving to express themselves in ways that are marked by independence and autonomy. And they're certainly beginning to prioritize more and more the connections they have with peers and friends and others outside the household. So again, you take all this together, and a family environment of any kind is going to warrant some adjustment to accommodate these vast developmental changes. So for these reasons, and I think many others, stepfamily life involving adolescents can be even more intricate and complicated than when stepfamilies form in the presence of very young children. So hopefully I've made a reasonable case here for this. So what should we do as step parents? How can we engage stepfamily life with adolescent stepchildren in ways that might optimize the experience, that might be most promotive of the development of positive relationships and well-being? Here I'm going to highlight 12 evidence-based tips. That probably seems like a lot. Maybe grab three or four of these that really resonate and take note of these. But I do think all of them are worth highlighting. So I'm going to strive to do that efficiently here. So one best practice to consider is to really try to prepare for that role, that step parent role. Really think carefully about the skills, the knowledge, the attitudes, tackling any blind spots or areas of confusion or uncertainty, putting all these things together in a way that will best prepare you to transition into stepfamily life with your eyes as wide open as possible. Now, I imagine you could be a step parent who has already made this transition. You're already there. The preparation period perhaps has closed. This still is valuable. So at any point along the development of stepfamily relationships, the more learning, the more insight building we can do at any point is going to be helpful. Can I get my hands on some credible resources that will really help sensitize me to common stepfamily challenges and strategies to address them? So this notion of preparation can really happen at any time, and I think is an important best practice. Another piece that shows up in my research is the value of new step parents being real. And this can mean a number of different things. It can mean the step parent being very open and transparent in their intentions, in their thinking, being quite clear with what those expectations or thoughts or reactions are. And being real can also mean being authentic. Adolescents can see inauthenticity from miles away. And so step parents who are themselves and who really kind of keep it real, that tends to land well with adolescents. So authenticity can go a long way. Another best practice to consider is being patient. And this can show up in a lot of different places. So one is being willing to tolerate delays in the progression of your relationship with new adolescent stepchildren, but also this advice, this best practice also can apply to being patient with yourself and recognizing all of the demanding elements that the step parent role can have. And so giving yourselves grace as step parents, not putting too heavy of expectations on yourself to do all of this perfectly. The step parent role is a challenging one. It's often a confusing one, and being patient with yourself can really go a long way. Next, don't force it. And specifically, don't force a type of relationship with the adolescent that just doesn't quite seem to emerge naturally. And instead, really let nature take its course. That doesn't mean you're not going to be making investments and making an effort, but it just means being thoughtful about what type of relationship seems to be most natural for you and this adolescent, and letting that develop and nurturing that and being open and being flexible to wherever that process might take you, as opposed to thinking that you can control this and that you can make a certain type of relationship happen, especially immediately. There's value in letting go of that false sense of control, as difficult as it can be, for sure. I have a lot of empathy for that. Another best practice, this shows up in a lot of research, especially when you're looking at step families that are new and or include children that are relatively older versus younger, and that is to back away from discipline. I think the confusion or uncertainty around what step parents should be doing in their role can lead adults to say, well, I know what parents do, and they're usually involved in discipline. Let me go ahead and just hop into that role. That can often go awry. And there's value in backing away from that impulse to do that, instead allowing resident not and not even non-resident parents to be involved actively in the discipline of children, and as a step parent supporting those other caregivers in their efforts to do so. Now, over time, there may be opportunity for a step parent to enter into more of a disciplinary role for these young stepchildren. um, I would say that's probably a rare circumstance where that ends up working out well for step families and for the well-being of those involved, but it's possible. But in general, on average, backing away from discipline tends to be a best practice for step parents, especially when they're going to be interfacing with adolescent stepchildren. Next, a best practice here to flexibly seize opportunities to interact. How might you, as the step parent, engage meaningfully with the adolescent? Are there ways that you could do that on a one-on-one basis, if that makes sense? Are there ways where you can be interacting with each other in a larger group, like the whole family? And here I should note that there are lots of different types of interaction that can promote high quality relationships between step parents and adolescent stepchildren. It's really not a one size fits all scenario at all. My research showcases a variety of different patterns of interaction that can make sense. Some are more academically oriented, some are just very casual, kind of more on the surface, not even necessarily all that deep of interaction that can actually end up working well. Other step parents do have a lot of versatile involvement. They're engaged in lots of different aspects of the adolescent's life. I think this is just a process of thinking about where are there opportunities to interact that would make sense, that could then be seeds that we planned to develop a relationship of some kind that just makes sense given the needs and goals of our particular family. Another best practice here, support existing and new family relationships. So as a step parent, you really have this powerful opportunity to demonstrate respect for and value toward and accommodation toward the adolescent's existing connections with a resident parent, with a non-resident parent, with siblings and others. And another piece of this that shows up in my research is some adolescents note that they saw value in having their step parent bring them into the world of that step parent's larger extended family, which introduced a whole set of new relationships that that adolescent otherwise would not have had and ended up benefiting from. So that's not necessarily going to be a preference for all adolescent stepchildren, but it's something that seems to really be of value to some. So worth considering. This next piece I think is really important. So as a new step parent, with adolescent stepchildren, there's a lot of value in really getting on the same page and really synchronizing with the resident parent with respect to parenting practices, parenting expectations, trying to create a really consistent caregiving environment. And this can be challenging because a step parent and a resident parent are going to bring maybe different backgrounds, different experiences with them to the step family environment. And there may be natural alignment there, but in many cases, there's probably going to be some misalignment. And so there's going to be a lot of value in trying to get alignment where you can. And as a step parent, there's often going to be probably cases where you're going to feel yourself needing to compromise or accommodate, or in some cases, assimilate into this family environment that you're going to be entering into. And that's a challenging process, but definitely worth thinking through carefully. Another best practice here is to avoid drama. Wow, is that easier said than done? Some family dynamics are so laden with drama that there's just this intense gravitational pull into the drama, and it seems like everything is trying to suck you into that drama. And that drama can really stem from family dynamics that were going on before you as a step parent even entered the picture. And some of this drama can be new as a result of step family formation itself. But in any case, The relationship between step-parents and adolescents tends to benefit from step-parents striving to avoid the drama. The adolescent tends to notice when a step-parent is actively just trying to stay out of those conflicts and tension points, and the adolescents tend to respect their step-parents for those efforts. So that tends to go a long way. I think this one's a real important one here. So don't try to fix or replace. Instead, thoughtfully contribute. So some of the young people in my own research noted that uh, they had some experiences where step parents came into the picture and seemed to approach relationships as an opportunity to fix things that the step parent thought were broken or to replace some other caregiver that used to be in that child's life or maybe even still is in that child's life. Instead of that way of thinking, there seems to be a lot of value in trying to make your own unique contributions as a step parent, which could give rise to a relationship between the step parent and adolescent that is unique and distinct and meaningful in its own right, outside of the context of all these other existing relationships. You might be able to develop something special and powerful and meaningful that might look a way you never expected, but could be very fulfilling and very rewarding as long as you keep that open mind and are flexible and think about all of this in terms of how can I really thoughtfully contribute to this adolescent's life and this larger family environment. That too can go a long way. Another piece here that can be helpful and daunting is to think about ways you as a new step parent can support an adolescent's adjustment to the many changes they're experiencing. We highlighted already a lot of the developmental changes they're experiencing. Can you as a step parent support them on that front? In my research, this often shows up among step parents and adolescents who share the same gender. Um, and maybe the adolescent is unable to rely as much on their resident parent with whom they do not share the same gender, but this new step parent can maybe fill in some of that space and help the adolescent navigate some gender specific changes that come during adolescence, especially regarding puberty. Um, Also, just all the changes that accompany the formation of step family life. Maybe the family has moved into a new home. The adolescent is now having to navigate a new school environment, new neighborhood, new friend groups. All of these changes that kind of encircle the adolescent, changes that they didn't necessarily choose for themselves. It can go a long way when the adolescent sees the step parent sincerely striving to support them in navigating those changes and coping with some of those changes. And then this last piece here, best practice number 12, make an effort. Easier said than done, especially involving adolescent stepchildren who might not at all be willing to reciprocate that effort, especially early on. They might be quite cold and standoffish. But I can say from the research I've done myself and research I'm familiar with, there's a lot of value in a step parent really being earnest in their attempts to develop a meaningful relationship with the adolescent, to convey a sense of genuine care for that adolescent, to show kindness toward that adolescent, to demonstrate sincere interest in that adolescent. And maybe even more specifically, in some of my research looking at helpful aspects of step parent adolescent interaction, in addition to conveying warmth and sincerity, there also seems to be a lot of value for step parents providing adolescents with agency and choice in how they interact and when they interact. And also the step parent striving for good timing, not trying to do too much too soon or too little too late. So that's the sense of timing and tempo is important. And then also, to the best of one's ability, trying to minimize awkwardness in the way they're interacting with an adolescent stepchild. And that, I think, simply reflects really an effort to try to be as natural and fluid as possible. And that kind of ties back to that don't force it tip, but really trying to avoid awkwardness when you can. But it turns out that even when there's a bit of poor timing as perceived by the adolescent in how the interactions are happening or some awkwardness or clunkiness, if the step parent conveys a lot of warmth and sincerity, the adolescent's often going to uh, be graceful and be willing to see that the step parent was having good intentions and might be willing to overlook some of the more clunky, poorly timed efforts. So I just wanted to highlight that piece that comes out of some research that I think is important to note. And then here's just a summary of all those 12 best practices. You might be thinking, oh, is that all? So again, maybe there's three or four of these that especially resonate that you might be able to put into practice. Certainly, all of these could go a long way in supporting your efforts to promote step family functioning, promote well-being, promote positive relationship development. But maybe a few of these really stuck out to you. So it might be worth just noting what those are, and then you can strive to implement some of these best practices moving forward. Now, I promised some free resources. So some of the research I have been alluding to, I'm highlighting here. So this actually comes out of some of my very recent work. I've had the good fortune of having some of these studies and papers made available online for free. So we call that open access. Here I have QR codes for those. So you can actually scan those and that'll take you right to the website where these articles can be freely downloaded. So I have a QR code for both of these pieces here. One focused on advice for new step parents from the perspective of stepchildren who experience step family formation during adolescence. And then this other piece, a really detailed analysis of the different types and attributes of step parent adolescent interaction that seem to show up. So these might be of interest to you. And then I think I have one more here. This is just a large literature review of studies conducted over the last 10 years that highlight factors that seem to be linked to higher quality step parent child relationships from the child's perspective in particular. So I have a QR code for that piece here as well, in case it's of interest. Also free, freely downloadable. Now, in terms of joining the conversation, so there are some platforms I try to be very active on. So LinkedIn is one of them. I have a QR code here to my profile. I try to post content related to research in this area pretty frequently. I'm very active in the comments section, so feel free to engage me there. I also have my research lab website here, the Thriving Through Family Transitions or Thrift Research Lab. There, I try to feature some of my active projects, things I'm working on with undergraduate and graduate students. I post new publications there. I'm in the process of getting more kind of user-friendly materials, maybe one or two pagers that summarize some of the research I'm doing that would be very accessible to step family members or to family practitioners of any kind. And then Instagram, this is a more recent development for me starting earlier this year in 2025. I've gotten very active on Instagram. I post reels 2 to 3 times a week when I can, where I try to just send out a minute or 2 minutes worth of content where I highlight key findings from my own research or research done by those in my field. So definitely feel free to engage me on Instagram. I'm very active there, happy to answer questions, happy to respond to direct messages. And that's the QR code there for that link. But that is it for me. Thank you all so much. I hope this was helpful.